everybody. Today I'm going to do one of my sit-downs, which I haven't done in a very long time, at least not in this format. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I've been spending quite a lot of time on the meta level of role-playing in the last couple of months, and especially in the last 2 to 3 or 4 weeks actually, because I've been on holiday and I've had a lot of time. And the reason why I've been moving onto the meta level of role-playing is because without actually wanting it and without knowing I was doing it, I have moved away from playing actively or as a game master into creating content for role-playing games, and especially for my own campaign, for one of the 2 campaigns that I'm running. And I've done a couple of videos on bits and pieces of what I've been doing, and it's come to a point where I've realized that I've been adding content, creating my own content, something that I would never have thought I'd ever do, because I'm not somebody who's ever written fiction. I've written books, I've written articles, but all in an academic field, but never fiction. And it's never something that I thought I would ever do. I wasn't really interested in it either, simply because I don't think that I'm a story writer. I'm a storyteller, which is different when I'm role-playing, mastering for a group, because it's an interactive thing where people can come up with their own ideas and then it kind of feeds off each other and you basically tell a story together. But sitting down and writing something was never something that I thought I'd do. But with regard to my Heritage of the Black Ice campaign, I've been forced to do so, but it wasn't something that I felt was in any way disagreeable or I disliked it, but it just happened. And the first time I started with it was when I decided that I wanted to do preludes for all of my players, because of course there is no script, there is no pre-made adventure that I can turn to in most cases, because the characters are unique, they're the players' creations, and I have to fit them into the framework of the story. And I did a video on how I created one of those preludes, and I also think I touched on the fact that when I first decided I wanted to run this campaign, which is a 3-book campaign that's been pre-published, I basically chose players that I knew and I wanted to play with, because I know that I like the way they play. And I thought that they might be interested in a story that I'm telling in that setting based on this particular story or this particular story, and that we could play in such a way that I enjoy, which is epic play. I'm not interested in power gaming, I'm not interested in min-maxing, I'm interested in telling a story, I'm interested in inhabiting the world. As I've said numerous times, the world comes first and then everything else has to fit into this world. And so I approached players and I said, well, would you like to play, blah, 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 and explained the story. And one of them said yes, and I'm going to play X, and he's a veteran player. And I was like, okay, yeah. And I looked at the book and it said, well, you know, this type of character can play in the campaign, but it's going to be difficult, and please refer to pages, blah, 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 for more details. And the other one, who doesn't know the world at all, had a character she had made for the Conan role-playing game, and she wanted to import that character because she really liked it, but she felt she didn't really get to play it to its fullest extent in the Conan game. So she came up with an idea. She had done some research on the world, she had bought the rules book, and she came up with a race which it says in the book, in the actual campaign, you cannot play. It absolutely positively states you cannot play this race. And I was like, okay, well. So as chance would have it, I was able to meet with that player, and we sat down in a cafe and we discussed it. And so she was telling me about this, and I was like, okay, well, you know, and this is, but then I thought, okay, she is so invested in this story and she has this image and this vision of this character and for this character that I thought, okay, forget about the campaign. This person wants to play this character. This person will inhabit this character. So now it's my job to find a way to integrate this character into the story. Even if they say it can't be done, challenge accepted. And then something that I really enjoy is research. I'm not a good world builder at all in terms of coming up with my own ideas. I think if I tried this, it would probably be your very generic fantasy world, like there is 1 dozen sitting on the shelf over there. I would not ever be original. But I'm very good at getting information on something that's already there and tying these pieces of information together to weave a tapestry that you can then use as a backdrop for your characters, or you can even weave them in. So I thought, okay, well, let's see what I can do. And of course, Das Schwarze Auge is Germany's second oldest role-playing game, and there is a plethora of information out there. And they have something that is called the Wiki Aventurica, which is a wiki page which contains information about anything and everything that's ever been published. Even if it's been published in the periodical that comes out once a month, that is basically the Aventurian Herald, as it were. It's kind of like a newspaper that gets published every month, and it contains in-game texts, and it contains the political developments across Aventuria, and it's all put in there, and you can get it once a month, and you can read it, and you can keep up with what's happening in the world, as it were. And all of this information is concentrated in this wiki. So if you've got kind of like a topic that you want information on, you just type in the topic and then you will find any and every single publication where this topic has been dealt with. And so I delved into this and I found out that there are, that this particular race that this character, this player was going to play, is comparatively new. It's not one of the ones that was always there. And I looked for information on them, and I also found an anthology with an adventure that is set in that particular region and has this race, this culture as the race where it's set. And I read through it, and as luck would have it, and this is where the second thing comes in, not only do I like research, in this particular instance I was also very lucky. But I'll come to serendipity later. And I found out that in this particular story, in this adventure, the heroes are tasked with finding it's kind of like an enchanted hammer, to cut a long story short, that enables the magical smiths of this race to make magical weapons. Now, magical weapons are something that's very rare in Aventuria, and they are not very powerful at all. They're not like the stuff in D&D +1, +2, +10, plus God knows what, and then I smite thee with my divine power. It's not like that at all. But they are magical, and this means that they can inflict certain types of damage against certain foes where normal profane weapons cannot do anything, or maybe just half damage, you know. And since I knew where we were going, I was like, okay, well, actually, she wants to play a smith, so this would work. And we could basically turn her into this magical smith, and we can take parts of this adventure and turn it into her anabasis, her becoming. Her coming of age, her becoming the character that she will be at the beginning of the story, of the actual campaign. So I wove this together and I said to her, okay, well, you know, I've been thinking about this, and I think, yes, we can put your character into this, but there are a couple of things that I will need to do with your character, and this is where I'm planning on sending your character. Like, I didn't give away too much, I just gave some rough some rough points that we were going to cover, and I just checked with the player that she was okay with this, and she said, yeah, that sounds fine. So we went through this and it worked. For the other player, But then still the issue remained that she's in a region that we're actually traveling to. So I need to find a way to get her to meet everybody else in the south, but then also have motivation for her to go back north again. And that was really difficult. And we had another character where the same applied. But here again, I was able to get stuff from another published adventure where I was like, well, we could kind of weave this into this. So I started this eclectic journey to find information, be it background information from gazetteers, as it were, or adventures, or anything else that I could find that is set in the region. And I mean, we're looking at 40 years, well, no, 30 plus years, 33 years at this stage, of material for Das Schwarze Auge, which you can still get as PDFs. And it's all detailed in the wiki. So I was able to just assemble folder upon folder upon folder of materials, which I started to read. As I read them, I became familiar with additional information, with additional artifacts, with additional people, with additional stories that had been told in this region. I was like, actually, let's ignore for a second the fact that I want to play this campaign. I don't think I want to play the campaign as it's been written. I think, and I always thought that I was going to be interested in and wanted to explore, and I'd always pitched it like this to my players, that I wanted to explore a land that had just managed to get rid of a tyrant. A magical, very powerful, demonic tyrant. Nobody knows what's really happened to her, in a way. Well, you know, she's been found dead, but, you know, as magical tyrants go, who knows if she's really dead. But she had had an icy grip on the land, and she had been perverting the nature of the land, so the flora and fauna, but she'd also been perverting people's hearts. And I was interested in exploring, what does this actually mean? So basically, you live under a tyrant for 10 years, you don't fall for her wily ways, but you are being subjugated. And maybe the person sitting next to you, now that the tyrant's gone, was the person doing the oppression, was the oppressor. It's like when somebody, at the end of the Second World War, a lot of people who had been in concentration camps met their concentration camp guards in the streets later in the big cities because they had never been prosecuted. And so how does that make you feel? What does that mean? But also, what does it mean if you grow up in a lawless country, in a lawless land that is being terrorized by militia that's being funded by this tyrant, that's propping up the tyrant in a way as well, because also certain types of people will be attracted to this kind of work. I mean, everybody can be perverted, everybody can be taken over by the dark side, and we're all corruptible. But there are people who are more corruptible than others. There are people that find it a lot easier to succumb to it or to give in to it. Maybe even because, I mean, let's face it, there are serial killers out there. There are psychopaths and sociopaths out there. And if you suddenly find yourself in a society that where sociopaths can thrive because they've got a job, hey, I can go and oppress my neighbors, you're very likely to find those sociopaths right in the middle of this. So what does that actually do to the people who are the oppressed and manage to survive somehow? How much of their own goodness did they have to sell out? Everything? Nothing? Half of it? You know, so this is what I was going to explore, and I was hoping, and I was trying to kind of like find ways of doing this. Then suddenly I found all of these other stories and bits and pieces. I found a whole adventure where I'm like, okay, well, I can take the premise of this adventure and I can almost one-to-one put it into my campaign and give one character a motivation which is so unique that it will explain him coming down south and then having to go back up north. So that worked. Then I had done the preludes with everybody. As I was thinking about this, suddenly I got an idea for which I now know is a meta plot. So the meta plot is a political thing. So basically in this particular case, how is this region going to develop politically? Because that is actually in the published campaign. However, it's published in such a way that I would find it really difficult to play, because I always find those intrigues and those political settings quite difficult to grasp, because I always find the motivation spurious, especially if you are a group of heroes, as is assumed in the actual campaign, that's not from the area. Why would I care? But suddenly I had this kind of meta plot, and I'm like, okay, well, this could be the story that we're coming towards, that may unfold in different ways depending on the player's choices, but that is happening. And every single one of them, every single one of my 4 players has a unique plot of their own that contributes to the meta plot, that looks at the meta plot from different sides, and that we can, if we manage to fulfill those plots, fuse together to then influence the meta plot. And even if we don't find all of the strands, we can get some of the strands and we can try and influence the meta plot and see what the outcome is. And suddenly I had a completely different story in my head. And again, serendipity dictated 2 things in one person's prologue, which I had created. One of them was based on a picture of a photograph that I used to show some information. And the other one is an item of lore, which I brought in for various reasons. It played out completely differently than I had envisaged it would play out, but it worked really well in the story, because the player took it, ran with it, ran into a completely different direction, but it worked. And then, as I was reading about a particular region, this particular plot device comes up again, and I'm like, that's ridiculous. This would work so well because it has already been introduced. So when we get there, there would be this recognition, which we could turn into a story. Then I read literally half a paragraph later, I read about something else where I'm like, I can't believe it. This is happening in this region, and it was foreshadowed in the prologue of another person in a different context, but here it pops up again, completely independently, because the second source where I found this particular plot device, I don't want to go into too much detail just in case one of my players is watching, because it would be giving away a lot of information. It's in a completely different publication from a completely different time, but it suddenly pops up there as well, and you kind of go, okay, that's never referenced in the actual campaign in that setting, but it is referenced in the actual campaign in a completely different context. So now I have 2 players in one very small location where we can tie all of this together for a little story for one of them, and a big story and plot hook and personal plot for the other person. Then I've got another storyline, which is a big plot, which suddenly popped into my head based on information that I read somewhere else, that I can play with this particular character. And there had also been serendipitously some foreshadowing in the prologue, which I had not envisaged at all. And suddenly I looked at all of this in my mind's eye, and I saw the different characters, and it was really like me visualizing a sociogram. Like, I have the different characters and I have their own motivations, I have the stuff that we've already covered, and suddenly I had this huge meta plot. And then I had all of these subplots which suddenly popped into my head. And what I'm going to do in my next video, which won't be a sit down, so you won't be looking at my face, but you will be looking at a piece of paper, is where I'll actually be sketching those. But I have to say that I have now reached a point where I'm using pre-made materials to write my own story. And this is something that I had not thought possible. I'd never wanted this, I'd never actively looked for it, but it just happened. And this is something that I find extremely exciting because, like I said, I'm not somebody who's good at imagining new things. I don't think that this would be my strength at all. I don't think that I would be very good at it because I would always feel that it lacks originality, it lacks the newness, the differentiating elements. But I have learned that if I'm given a world that is developed, where I have stuff that I can look at and I can use for research, I am able to write, to a degree, stories, scenes, maybe a whole episode. I mean, there will be or when you see this, I will have published another video where I explain how I created one of the side quests, which has already also been played. And those of you who speak German can also compare the plans that I had laid and how it then turned out in the session. Where I actually took something that was completely empty. It was a white canvas and I just put in stuff that I got again from other materials. But that made sense. And suddenly I started to write my first side quest. It was, I think, altogether we played for 8 hours. So that was 8 hours worth of, or maybe 7.5 hours. 8 hours of entertainment, plot-driven, character-driven. And it worked. And it was actually very enjoyable for myself to sit down and kind of go, okay, well, you can do this. You can write this story and make it work for the characters. But there I started with the characters in mind. Where do I think they would like to go? What would they like to experience? And then suddenly I realized that I could turn this into part of the meta plot and introduce something of the meta plot there. And basically make them look at the whole setting, at the whole story, from a different angle, which they hadn't seen so far, which will play a role later. And I managed to put in foreshadowing. But I think it worked organically. And this is basically where I'm now looking more at the meta level. So I've been doing a lot of research now on how to write stuff, and I've been watching a lot of stuff on Orkenspalter TV. I can only recommend their Wetten DSA series, where you have very experienced authors, dungeon masters, etc., talking not only DSA but Shadowrun as well, and other Fate, talking about how they see role playing, how they approach storytelling. And I've also gotten a very interesting book recommendation, and it's a book about how to write scripts for film and TV, because it kind of gives you first of all, it gives you a language that you can use on a meta level to talk about how to write and how these different things that I'm just referring to as things at the moment, or as plot, what they are called. And once I know myself, once I have a word for something, I find it a lot easier to manipulate in my own head my ideas as to what I'm trying to do and where I'm going with this. So I'm going to get this book and I'm going to read it, because I do want to, when I do things, I don't do them by halves. When I say I want to do something, then I want to have the research done and I want to have the background knowledge that I feel, yes, I can do this and I know what I'm talking about. I'm more of a planner, which is why I'm so surprised at the moment to be talking to you about this, because all of this is kind of completely unplanned. I just fell into it because it was dictated to me by the circumstances, by my players trying or wanting to play a particular type of race, which meant I needed to find a way to integrate this race, which meant I needed to do more research, which meant I found stuff. Now, when I found one thing, I also found another thing. I got hooked. And so it was kind of like a virtuous cycle, as it were, that basically propelled me to ever greater heights with regard to where I wanted to go and what I thought I could do. And suddenly all of these ideas sparked. But I'm also looking into my next campaign already, and I've put this together. I know already what I want to play. I haven't read the book yet. It's a 3-part series again. But once I've read the book, I will then try and think about how I want to run it and what things I want to bring in. And I will probably be able to do it in a much different and more planned way, you know. And so this is what I'm doing. And I think that for me as a game master, I now view this whole thing of buying an adventure and then playing it with very different eyes from what I used to do. Because in the past, I mean, it was mainly Pathfinder, and there is no world that exists. And I keep saying this, and Dungeons and Dragons is a world that is basically only skin deep. And regardless of how many Dragonlance novels there are, at the gaming table, it's skin deep. When you look at the adventures, it doesn't matter. Whatever you do, it has no impact on the world. But in DSA, it is very different. And so I think that for me, what I've learned through the last couple of months of earnestly running D&D for groups that actually want to play D&D in the way DSA in the way I want to play DSA, in the way I think role-playing should work, that you inhabit a world and not just a gaming system, that I have found a world that is so rich that I can take stuff from this world and create something within the world that is true to the world, which in my opinion is very important. I'm very much canon. I'm very much into the world exists. It is a living world which other people inhabit as well. And I cannot just go and do my own thing. I mean, there is one thing where I've decided to basically take the lore into my own hands because something was written 23 years ago, and they said that this was going to be picked up later. It's never been picked up in 23 years, so I'm like, okay, well, now it's fair game. I can go and make this my own. If they ever go back to this and pick it up, they will probably pick it up differently. But at the moment, this is what my story revolves around, and this is what my players are enjoying, so I don't care. I would not go out there and kill Empress Rohaya simply because you don't. I mean, if she dies in-game, then that's a decision for the editors of DSA to make. It's not my decision, and I would not allow my group to do it. But I think this device, while it is very important, is still minor enough for me to be able to tamper with it. But I feel that with the richness of the world that DSA provides to players and to dungeon masters, I am able to take this world and even take pre-published adventure paths, like for example the Borberad campaign, and make it work in such a way that it works for my players and it works for my playing style, and putting in stuff that fits but that extends it and expands it without destroying it or corrupting it. So like I said, I mean, I am going to do a couple more videos around this. I don't know how long they will be. I don't know when I will be putting them out, but I am going to do a little bit of the sociogram that I talked about and just show you how I'm doing this, because maybe there are people out there who are not into solo gaming or solo RPGing and are looking for some even just thoughts. I'm not giving advice, I'm just showing you my thought process. And my thought process is very much informed by the system and the world that I'm playing in. So it would be different for other worlds, but if you're playing DSA, you may actually find some of this interesting or helpful. So I'll talk to you soon. I wish you a happy rest of the day. Bye!